modern Three Kingdoms War, the United States, China, and Russia are engaging in a relentless power struggle. But can Russia maintain its independence between these two superpowers? Or will it be swept up in a whirlwind of power they cannot control? The rapid changes in the global order have pushed Russia to a crucial crossroads, where every misstep could lead to unforeseeable consequences. Will Russia emerge victorious in this survival race, or will it be left behind? When the trade war between the United States and China erupted, the entire world seemed unable to look away from the powerful tariffs the US imposed on China. Each time the US decided to tax Chinese goods, the global market trembled, affecting every industry from technology to agriculture. People debated and analyzed every move of the US, and China didn't back down, responding with equally forceful measures. But here's something quite interesting. While all eyes were on the showdown between these two giants, another player seemed to be absent from all negotiations and was not targeted by tariffs at all: Russia. That's right, while the US and China clashed, Russia stayed on the sidelines, not because it wasn't important, but because it wasn't heavily impacted by this trade war. In fact, Russia didn't participate in any of the negotiations between the two powers. Although not punished with tariffs like China, Russia faced a different weapon that the US had been using for years: sanctions. Before the US-China trade war began, the US and its allies had imposed sanctions on Russia, mainly due to the 2014 Crimea event and the ongoing conflict in Ukraine since 2022. These sanctions have caused trade relations between the two nations to nearly freeze in recent years. Therefore, rather than tariffs, the US chose to use direct economic sanctions against Russia, causing trade between the two countries to decline sharply. No longer were there bustling trade deals like before, and the relationship between the US and Russia quietly drifted, rarely making headlines. Looking at the figures, it becomes even clearer. Trade relations between the US and Russia have sharply declined in recent years, and the numbers speak for themselves. In 2022, the total trade volume between the two countries was only a modest 14.4 billion USD, a figure so small that it's hard to believe. What's even more notable is that this figure represented less than 1% of the total US export volume. Yes, a minuscule percentage in the global trade picture, highlighting how trade relations between the US and Russia have almost disappeared. Especially concerning is the decline in US exports to Russia. Once a potential market, the US only exported 1.7 billion USD to Russia in 2022, a staggering 74% drop compared to the previous year. This is hardly a number to be optimistic about, further confirming that the economic ties between the two nations are no longer what they once were. Then, looking at 2023, the numbers for imports from Russia to the US were not much brighter either. It accounted for just 4.87% of total imports from other countries, primarily consisting of items like chemicals, fertilizers, and platinum, goods that the US could easily source elsewhere if needed. With all these statistics, it's clear that trade relations between the two countries are becoming a thing of the past, no longer a significant factor in the global economic landscape. In fact, the trade relationship between the US and Russia had nearly hit rock bottom even before the trade war with China erupted. This wasn't a coincidence, but rather the result of a long-standing rift between the two nations. Russia is no longer an important trade partner for the US. Over the years, the flow of goods between the two countries has drastically decreased, and now, this relationship is little more than dry statistics in trade reports. The name Russia has almost vanished from the map of economic negotiations with the US. Honestly, there's no longer anything to put on the trade scale, and because of that, the US doesn't need to target Russia in trade wars. For Washington, Russia has become an outsider, no longer influential enough to cause concern in the global market. You may have wondered why, while the trade war between the US and China has shaken the global market, Russia hasn't been a target. What is the main reason behind this? First, Russia is not a crucial link in the global supply chain that the US relies on. The US focuses on essential items such as microchips, smartphones, and electronics, products that Russia does not produce. Russia mainly exports oil, gas, fertilizers, and metals, goods that the US can easily source from other countries. Therefore, even though the US imposes tariffs on many other countries, Russia is not in the crosshairs. When we talk about the US-China trade war, the stark difference is that China is America's world factory. China produces everything from smartphones and laptops to everyday consumer goods. And if a container from China is delayed, prices in US stores can immediately change. China plays an incredibly important role in the global supply chain, something Russia does not have. Russia is not deeply involved in the US supply chain and does not produce essential products. While Russia and China have a cooperative relationship, in the trade war, the US isn't overly concerned about Russia because, simply put, Russia is not a key player for the US economy. If the US were to impose tariffs on Russia, it wouldn't just affect the economy, it could backfire. Such a move could strengthen the relationship between Russia and China, increasing strategic cooperation between the two nations. This could impact the energy market and pose a threat to the US financial position, as China has begun developing its own financial system, using the renminbi instead of the US dollar. In conclusion, imposing tariffs on Russia could be counterproductive. Not only would it not weaken Russia, but it could also create opportunities for closer cooperation between Russia and China, presenting a significant challenge to the US on the global stage. The trade relationship between Russia and China has truly skyrocketed in recent years. In 2023, trade between the two nations reached a record high of $240 billion, 0 cents. An impressive figure reflecting the increasingly close cooperation between these two countries. A large portion of this trade involves oil, with Russia selling oil to China at discounted rates, paid for in yuan rather than US dollars. This is not merely an economic deal. It is a significant strategic move, contributing to a shift in the global financial order by reducing reliance on the US dollar, the dominant currency in international transactions. The use of the yuan instead of the dollar signals that both Russia and China are seeking to break free from America's dominance in the global financial system. The US-China trade war not only has a direct impact on the relationship between these two major economies, but it also has indirect consequences for other countries, including Russia. The US and its allies have escalated sanctions against China, weakening the flow of money and affecting China's international payment transactions. As China has faced US tariffs, it has started to adjust its trade structure and reduce production. This has not only diminished China's demand for goods, but also impacted the demand for raw materials from Russia, particularly oil, a commodity China heavily relies on. Predictions suggest that oil prices could drop by as much as 30% by 2025, which would undoubtedly deal a significant blow to Russia's economy, which is heavily dependent on energy export. Although not directly subject to tariffs like China, Russia cannot escape the negative effects of the US-China trade war. The decline in economic relations between these two major economies has affected Russia in various ways. A drop in oil prices and weakened demand from China could complicate long-term trade agreements between Russia and China. Russia will face a reduction in income from oil exports, and if oil prices continue to fall, Russia will need to find ways to adapt to the new situation. While the Russia-China relationship is increasingly strengthened, the effects of the US-China trade war cannot be overlooked. Russia may have avoided direct tariffs, but the shifts in the global trade environment are pushing Russia into a difficult position, forcing it to adapt to unforeseen changes. When Donald Trump took office, the United States rolled out an audacious strategy to counter China, not just through tariffs, but across several fronts, such as technology, finance, and politics. The core of this strategy was to curb China's rapid rise, preventing the country from achieving global dominance in key areas. While Trump did not impose direct tariffs on Russia, he adopted an indirect approach by targeting China and its major trade partners, including Russia. Trump's strategy can be described as a quiet encirclement, affecting Russia even though it was not the primary target. Under Trump's administration, the US imposed tariffs and strong economic policies to exert pressure on China. At the same time, by tightening its grip on China, the US also made it difficult for Russia to maintain stable trade relations with China, which is Russia's most important partner in the energy sector. Specifically, the US implemented measures to weaken China's power and influence in technology and finance. Meanwhile, Russia, heavily reliant on energy exports to China, could not escape the indirect effects of Trump's strategy. Russia would face increasing pressure as China was targeted by the US on multiple fronts, potentially reducing its imports from Russia. The goal of the US was not only to constrain China in the realms of technology and finance, but also to keep Russia in a difficult position, preventing it from freely expanding its global influence. While China was the direct target of tariff strategies, Russia became an indirect victim of this encirclement strategy, suffering the consequences of the economic upheavals that the US created in China's economy. Russia finds itself at the heart of a tense geopolitical battle, and its current position is far from easy. Positioned between two great powers, the United States and China, Russia faces incredibly difficult choices. If Russia decides to lean toward China, it risks losing its strategic independence and becoming a subordinate part of China's growing influence. Russia would no longer be an equal partner, but rather fall into a state of dependency on China, a situation that could harm its long-term interests. However, if Russia seeks to distance itself from a close relationship with China in pursuit of closer ties with the West, it faces a different challenge. The door to the West has firmly shut following sanctions, especially after events like the Ukraine war and the Crimea crisis. This could lead to Russia's isolation, leaving it without a reliable strategic partner. In this case, Russia would struggle to maintain its existence and influence on the global stage, unable to find a middle ground between the US and China. The greatest challenge Russia faces is maintaining its independent position amidst the West's isolation and China's partial control. This issue not only concerns Russia's freedom of action in international politics, but also impacts its economy as dependence on China for energy and other resources grows. Russia must find a way to balance not alienating China while still maintaining the respect of the international community. The US-China trade war may push Russia into a difficult corner, with time and resources to reshape its position in the new world order becoming increasingly scarce. Russia may lack the strength and ability to seize all the opportunities in a world where superpower relations are shifting rapidly. Ultimately, whether Russia can find a way out remains a big question as its options continue to narrow. This three-party war is not just about power, but also survival in today's globalized world. Whether Russia likes it or not, it will have to choose its path in a world full of tough choices. As the three-party war of the 21st century continues to intensify, Russia can no longer remain on the sidelines. Every decision they make now is not only strategic, but also determines their survival in an ever-changing world. Can Russia maintain its independence and carve out its own path between these great powers? Or will it be forced to choose between the US and China? Only time will tell the answer to this question, but one thing is certain: the future of Russia will no longer be a story solely of its own making.